The Ukrainian Armed Forces continue to destroy Russian armored vehicles and communication equipment. In the southern Slobodjanski direction, border guard aerial reconnaissance units delivered precise strikes, damaging 2 tanks, burning the Murom 2 surveillance system, 2 antennas, and enemy personnel. Analysts note that more and more Russian armored vehicles are reappearing on the battlefield, and they explain that the possibility of armored assaults by the occupiers is made possible by severe frosts, which have frozen the ground and allowed heavy equipment to move forward again.
How effective is it? The answer to this question is absolutely obvious. All the equipment the enemy uses, even though it is literally covered with electronic warfare systems and additional physical elements meant to protect this armor, no, it still burns perfectly well. And that means the enemy is once again returning to their old tactics. Infiltration by small and very small infantry groups.
The Ukrainian General Staff counted about 50 battles since the start of the day. Ukrainian forces repelled about 10 Russian attacks in the Kostiantynivka direction. The invaders tried to advance 7 more times in the southern Slobozhansky sector of the front and at the Huliaipol bridgehead. Ukrainian defenders stopped 6 Russian assaults. Russia wants to create a springboard for shelling Zaporizhia. This was reported by the Southern Defense Forces. Russian troops are attempting to break through to the village of Stepnogorsk in the Zaporizhia region. It is located in a favorable position, and from there, Russian guns can reach the regional center.
The Russians, despite having entered Huliaipol, the fighting continues, right in the settlement itself, which is being systematically destroyed by Russian aviation, and it's clear why, to prevent our units from being able to defend and to hold these defensive lines. But on the other hand, again, our countermeasures, our counterattacks, they don't allow the Russians to create those strong footholds, those stable bridgeheads, to secure themselves there and continue their offensive actions.
Active fighting is also ongoing in other sectors of the southern front, in the Alexandrovsk and Orikhiv areas. There, Russian occupiers are unsuccessfully trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses near several settlements. And more than a third of all battles today have taken place in the Pokrovsk direction. Urban fighting is ongoing in Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Defense forces are also hunting for Russian drone operators. This was reported by the spokesperson for the East Operational Command, Grigory Shepoval. According to him, search and assault operations and the elimination of invaders are taking place directly within Pokrovsk's urban area. The northern part of the settlement is held by Ukrainian forces. In
Marienhard, our soldiers are holding defensive lines and eliminating the enemy in the outskirts of the city. To contain the enemy, the city's defenses have been reinforced with additional forces and resources. Logistics remain difficult. To strengthen our capabilities, we are taking measures to expand supply corridors to Mirnograd. Grigory Shapoval, spokesperson for the East Military Group, in an interview with Donbass News.
Russia continues to lose personnel and equipment in the war against Ukraine. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in the past 24 hours, the defense forces have eliminated 990 invaders, and the total losses of the Russian army have already exceeded 1,221,000 military personnel. In addition, the Ukrainian Armed Forces hit 6 tanks, 3 armored combat vehicles, and more than 70 enemy artillery systems. Russian commanders will also be short 3 multiple-launch rocket systems, 5 air defense assets, and more than 200 military vehicles. More than 1,000 occupier drones will also no longer appear in the Ukrainian sky.
Our broadcast, we are joined by Pavlo Ikichuk, head of military security programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21. Pavlo, good morning and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Good afternoon.
Practically speaking, compared to what we've been hearing lately, the number of assaults in the most active directions has almost halved. This is Pokrovsky, and we can also now talk about Huliaipol as one of the record holders in terms of the number of assaults. Honestly, I would like to say that this intensity is decreasing and that over time, the offensive momentum might be fading. The occupiers' momentum could die out, but unfortunately, that's not how it works. How would you explain the decrease in these assaults? And overall, what can you say about the situation on the front, on the line of contact? Right now, of course, we're not just talking about the Pokrovsky and Huliaipol directions, since everything there is interconnected.
Well, the quantitative indicators, the number of combat clashes, are only half of the equation, because you also have to look at the qualitative indicators. So it's not just about which group you're clashing with, but also about the size of that group. If you look at the same Pokrovska direction, the Kostiantynivka direction, and to some extent the Lyman direction, you can see a process where the enemy is trying to amass rather large groups in order to infiltrate and seep through our defensive lines. On the one hand, this looks like a certain kind of pause, but on the other hand, a clash with a group of 2 to 3 infantrymen is still a clash, and so is a clash with 9 to 10. The situation is difficult in the Pokrovsky direction. In the south, Pokrovsk-Myrnograd, in their southern part. The situation is also becoming more difficult north of Pokrovsk, where the enemy, this time it's a different army, the 51st, is trying to encircle Pokrovsk from the north. In fact, the enemy is not changing its plans. They're obvious in this section of the front. And the outlook, if they capture Pokrovsk-Myrnograd, they will move further to the rear of Kostiantynivka and Druzhkivka. In the Kostiantynivka direction, things are also getting increasingly difficult. The Russians are trying to encircle Kostiantynivka, in fact, the Kostiantynivka and Druzhkivka agglomeration, from both the east and the south. And they're advancing from the southwest as well. On the Lyman direction, we're seeing a regrouping there, a buildup of forces. And obviously, this is a sign of yet another surge in enemy activity, with the goal of breaking through and advancing as deep as possible. And then to the north, it's the Kupiansk direction. Yeah. The enemy is trying, on one hand, to continue their breakthrough into the city. There, our forces are eliminating the group, or more precisely, the group of Russian servicemen who managed to enter the city. Fierce fighting is taking place in several locations, but if we talk about the agglomeration as a whole, then from Lyman 1, they are trying to encircle. To advance from the north as well, from the northern bridgehead, although in recent days, activity in this direction has decreased. Special attention should be paid specifically to the eastern bank of the Oskil, at least that's how it seems to me. In the south, the situation is difficult, not only in the Huliai-Pol sector, but along the entire direction of the Russian advance. From east to west, at the Huliai-Pol line, and to the north, up to the Zaporizhia Highway, up to the Donetsk-Zaporizhia Highway. And in the Arikov direction, we also need to add a significant and noticeable escalation in activity. To be more specific and detailed about the location, to the west of this particular sector, where the Russians are currently trying direct and aggressive frontal assault operations. To create a kind of salient and encirclement of our forces in the Huliai-Pol or Rykov direction. At the same time, the intensity of the fighting has decreased somewhat, precisely thanks to the efforts of the defense forces. It's not that the enemy has become less active. It's that the Ukrainian defense forces have strategically modified their tactical approaches, deployed additional military reserves to the front, and to some extent managed to effectively neutralize and blunt the overall offensive potential of the enemy. This ongoing offensive. They managed to break the enemy's onslaught.
Pavel, let's talk in more detail about Zaporizhia. Russian troops are trying to break through to Stepnogorsk in the Zaporizhia region. This was reported by the spokesperson for the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, in a comment to Ukrainian media. According to him, the settlement is located on a position advantageous for the enemy, which would allow them to shell Zaporizhia. Voloshin noted that fighting continues on the approaches to the settlement of Stepnogorsk. Can we take a closer look at this direction, if possible? You mentioned that earlier. But what's actually happening there, Pavel?
Well, there's really nothing to analyze. It's just a salient, an incursion aimed at getting as close to Zaporizhia as possible. And combined with the fighting near Huliaipol, where the enemy is advancing from the east to the west along the Donetsk-Zaporizhia highway, thus pushing into the front and rear of our southern defenses. If the Russian forces actually manage to break through our primary defensive lines and advance significantly further west of Orikhiv, then it creates a much more dangerous and highly unstable situation for the entire region. The Russians' plan is to create this situation, specifically a cauldron around our two main defensive strongpoints. These are the Huliaipol sector and the Orikhiv sector, which are being hit by converging attacks. Our military high command has successfully identified and analyzed this plan, and now our primary strategic efforts are focused on effectively neutralizing and preventing these dangerous flanking strikes. To get off. With absolute and meticulous precision, we must identify the hostile forces' strategic flanking maneuvers and deep penetrations, and thus effectively forestall the aggressive seizure and occupation of large and vital territories. If they manage to succeed in the Huliaipol direction, and also develop their success at Stepove, then in the southern direction, well, the threat will really be to Zaporizhia itself.
You're talking about the threat to Zaporizhia, meaning what's actually happening right now in the Zaporizhia direction. Is there any reason to say that the occupiers currently have enough resources for some kind of breakthrough? That literally just a little more and they could break through to Zaporizhia? Or will it still be, as we've been seeing, throughout the entire full-scale invasion, this slow, months-long process, these sluggish attempts to advance in one direction or another?
You see, on the one hand, we have a bad example of how, in just 5 months in the south, the enemy managed to advance into the flank of our defenses. From the sector of Kharkov to the area of Huliaipol, this occurred because our defensive forces were heavily focused on the expected strike coming from the south. If these particular monthly rates of steady advancement persist in this manner, for example, as a hypothetical illustration, in this sector, then, indeed, by summer they could reach Zaporizhia. But the Russians are also changing their tactics in the south, in the southeast, and the defense forces are now paying much more attention to this area than before. Do the Russians have enough strength to carry out their plans? That seems highly unlikely at this point, but there is always such an option as strategically shifting the focus of their main strike to a different location entirely. If their current objectives do not materialize as planned for them in the east, they can always choose to move reserves, resources, and transfer assets to the direction where they're having success, meaning the southeast and the south.